everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alley Cats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Baltazar.
And how about the Cats, huh?
What did they do something?
I think they won.
Actually, they're losing to Iowa State 2-1 right now.
Okay, shut up. That team doesn't exist. But the K-State football team ended up winning up against Texas Tech down in Lubbock, 38-21. Score doesn't really indicate how close it was for the majority of the game. But, we're going to talk about the game more generally and then probably spend 20 minutes on the topic that everyone is currently debating on Twitter. So let's just talk about the game more generally first. It's a good win. It keeps our Big 12 championship hopes alive, though I wouldn't exactly still say it's likely. But, you still control your own destiny, in a sense. If you win out, you're going to Arlington. And I think that is, this team played well with their backs to the wall that last year. They didn't play the defense played well pretty much the entire game. The only thing was a couple of fluky plays, which is going to happen whenever they throw the ball as much as they do, or as much as they did. But I think that this team... I think having their backs up against the wall kind of woke them up a little bit. Like a kind of a shock to the system that they sort of needed.
Yeah, and we've seen that from Kleiman teams before. I think we even said that it's not at all unprecedented for a Kleiman team to go on the road to Lubbock after a really rough loss and then turn their season around. So, this isn't unprecedented at all. So... but I do think the manner in which K-State was able to win the game was a bit unexpected. It wasn't unusual for K-State to really kind of have a get-right game in Lubbock, which is kind of weird that it's Lubbock, because when I was a lot younger, K-State really struggled against Texas Tech, but now they've won, I believe, 7 straight 12 of the last 13.
That is correct.
Yeah, and so they've kind of Texas Tech's number for over a decade now.
Yeah. So we also got to see the massive playtime debut of Avery Johnson. And before we talk about that more generally, I'll just read the two stat lines off here of the two quarterbacks. In terms of passing, Will Howard was 6 of 9, 86 yards with a long of 42. Avery Johnson was 8 of 9 for 77 yards with a long of 21. But where it sort of matters most is in the rushing game, where Avery was 13 for 90 with 5 touchdowns. Will was only 3 for 8, no touchdowns, only registered the one rush.
Yeah.
The two others, I believe, were either tackles at the line or sacks.
Yeah, I think he had one loss of 8 on a sack, one gain of 8 on a run, and then I think he had a no gain. So it ended up coming out to a net of 0. Although he did gain yardage at various points, and at times he showed some decent pocket awareness as well. Had a couple situations where I cannot believe he escaped the pocket without getting sacked.
One of the first plays to Ben Sinnott.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was thinking. But Will didn't turn the ball over for the first time all season, and generally was fine, I think, in the action that we saw.
All right, time to rip the Band-Aid off. Normally we would save this for the very end, but I feel it's such an important topic that it sort of has to be mentioned at the beginning. This has caused a great deal of controversy within the K-State Twitter sphere, and it seems to even cross the usual lines of casual versus hardcore, because normally those are the two that are at odds at one another. We seemingly have more people on both sides thinking that this should be Avery's team. I slept on it. I personally have not come to a conclusion either way. And this isn't me trying to be like a dirty fence sitter who doesn't have an opinion. I understand both arguments. so before we sort of have like a roundtable discussion about this topic in particular and then move on to the rest of the game, hopefully avoiding this subject outside of this one moment, do you have anything that you want to say on top before we get into the pros and cons?
Just that it's nice to have a QB debate where at least I think that there's two solid options. And it's not like many issues of the past where it's, you're really struggling with picking one. More often than not, when you have a QB debate or QB battle, it's you have two guys that are just kind of average or worse. But here we have a Will Howard guy that I think is one of the main reasons we won a Big 12 title last year. And then you have an Avery Johnson who just made the front page of the Kansas City Star. So
a star is born.
Yes, indeed he was. And it's a nice position to be in.
It's a nice position as a fan, but an unenviable one as a coaching staff.
Yes. And I think that it's going to be an interesting line to tread. But I think the main issue is just going to be, I don't think the locker room will be an issue at all, based off what we've seen. Will, based off everything we've heard, it was very, very supportive of Avery. And Avery has reportedly been a really great teammate this whole season. So I don't think whoever gets picked is like the other one, the one that doesn't get picked, I should say, is going to become a locker room cancer. I don't think that's even something that needs to qualify.
No.
Yeah, like that's not something that needs to be discussed at all. It's just not going to factor into it. It's going to entirely come down to on the field performance, and I'm interested to see fan reaction as well. Although the coaches obviously don't really care about that. So,
yep.
So we'll. It's going to be interesting because there are pros and cons to both, and I think especially right now, there's a lot of momentum behind Avery for very obvious reasons because he just had an incredible performance. I mean, 5 rushing touchdowns, first player in FBS to do that all year, the first freshman to ever do it in all of FBS history. That's quality. That's elite play. And there's no way around that. But that doesn't mean there aren't pros to playing Will as well. Will still has likely a more concrete connection with guys on the field, especially Ben Sinnott. Those two have really, really great chemistry. And Will has been around longer. He has more experience. But again, it's tough to argue against Avery too. And we're the biggest Will Howard fans on earth, perhaps.
Maybe outside of his family.
Yeah, well, but I mean, at the same time, even for us, we can look at this objectively and say that there's absolutely a world, and it may be the one that we live in, where Avery Johnson should be QB1. But there's still pros and cons to evaluate for both, and it's worth going over both to try and dissect this issue, figure out what the best option is, figure out what works for both, and maybe figure out a situation where both of them play. Because I think that's probably going to end up being the most likely outcome, is we're going to see both of those guys down the stretch.
Yeah. So let's just dive. We'll do one each, at a time. I mean, pro for Will Howard and pro for Avery Johnson. The pro for Will Howard is, you mentioned it, is mostly playbook knowledge, as well as chemistry with Ben Sinnott. I think at this point, Will Howard has a better handle on the offense because he's been in the offense longer. Pro for Avery Johnson, almost exclusively, he's a more physical specimen than Will is. He's faster. He has a better arm if he's able to know the throws. So, I don't know which one. The problem is that every single time you bring a pro for the other, there's a pro for one. And it kind of just averages out to a neutral where you have to shrug your shoulders and say, like, well, both are good.
Yeah. So do I get a pro or con? Or what am I supposed
We're doing pros for both.
Okay, pros for both. A huge pro for Will is that this has been his team all year. There's a ton of bless you.
Thank you.
There's a ton of faith in him from the coaching staff, and we've seen Avery play great, but there's probably a reason that Will was playing over Avery. So I don't doubt the coaching staff's ability to nurture and develop quarterback talent. I think that is obvious at this point. They know what to do with quarterbacks. There's a reason that Kleiman has had several quarterbacks be drafted at this point, and I think all of them are still in the league right now. So there's precedent there for Kleiman knowing what to do with quarterbacks, and that decision making. He leaned towards Will. Maybe it was out of loyalty, but maybe it was because he truly thought that he gave us the best chance of winning. So that's a pro in favor of Will, is that the staff went with him after having like 6 months or 8 months with Avery. So there's a potential pro for Will. And then a pro for Avery is that despite being younger, despite probably not having as detailed a playbook knowledge as Will does, he came in and played incredible. 90 yards and 5 touchdowns in your first significant playing time ever at the Division I ranks. This time last year, he was slinging the ball around for Mays, and he looks comfortable. There were times on his touchdown runs he looked like he was kind of bored.
And that's the thing, is that he's looked bored almost every time he's played.
I said bored. I'll try and frame that in a different way.
Comfortable, confident.
Yes, comfortable. I think that's the best way to put it. I like that. Because some of his touchdown runs, he looked very content. He looked like he was having fun. I think was the big thing. I think that's a lot of times with a really talented player, that's a good way to tell, is that they look more like they're having fun than they're really trying really, really hard. And Avery looked like he was having a ton of fun playing. It did not look particularly stressful. At least he didn't give off that feeling or that look. And he was very confident in himself and how he was performing. And he looked like he belonged. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. And, of course, his explosiveness and everything plays into that as well. But, he looked like he belonged. And if you looked around, everybody was congratulating him the same way they would have been congratulating Will. It looked like, as a whole, nobody on the offense really skipped a beat or reacted any differently to having Avery on the field than they did Will.
And Will was supportive of him.
Yeah, Will was incredibly supportive of him. Avery was quoted after the game saying Will was the most supportive of him. And I do... There's a lot of times where I wouldn't believe that with the quarterback. Even with K-State in the past, there's a lot of times I wouldn't have believed that. Like maybe the Jake Waters, Daniel Sams battle. I probably wouldn't have believed it as much. But I do really believe that with Will. And I don't think it's a stretch at all for how... we've seen Will act in the past and just how he's been as a person. But Avery's just been... Will and Avery's relationship seems really positive, really interesting, and mutually beneficial for both of them. But Avery just stepping on the field and the offense not skipping a beat at all, just shifting, is very notable, I think.
Oh. So I'll leave it at this. Two thoughts. Firstly, if Will is the announced starter, I know people are going to do it. I'm kind of just crying in the rain here. Please do not make his life hell. Not again. He's been through it once, twice before. he doesn't deserve that happening to him again. Not after all he's given to the fans. But that being said, if someone put a gun to my head and said I had to pick one of the quarterbacks, I love Will to death, and if this is the outcome, my heart genuinely breaks for him because he deserves better. But if someone put a gun to my head, I would say that this should be Avery Johnson's team. But I think there's a world where they both play and can both have a symbiotic relationship with one another rather than a parasitic one.
Yeah, I agree. I think this should be Avery's team. Of course, we love Will on this podcast, and we have since we started. But it's undeniable that Avery was just different. He was in a different gear than everyone else. He looked phenomenal as a runner. We've seen some of him as a passer, and it was hit and miss. There's a few throws even that he completed that could have been better, but he also had some really fantastic throws as well. So I'd love to see more of him as a passer. If he starts next week, I'd really like to see us incorporate more passing for him, even though running is obviously very effective.
Yeah, because the running game isn't sustainable no matter who the quarterback is, because the receivers still need to separate. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, but I do think that Avery's probably the guy at this point. Will, I think, is going to go down as one of the all-time great stories in K-State history for his being thrust into the spotlight as a freshman and the fall, then the rise, and really being one of, if not the main reasons that we win the Big 12 in 2022, to being really, by at least some people, reviled again, or disliked, I should say. And he probably does deserve better, but, it's a competitive sport, and Avery he's better, I think, at least as a runner. I think there's no objective way to tackle that any other way. Will obviously probably is further along mentally, in terms of maturity. He's probably further along just because he's been around longer. That's not a knock on Avery's maturity. He seems very mature, but Will's just a different level in that regard. But Avery's the more explosive playmaker, and I think right now this offense needs a playmaker, and Avery is that guy. And last week we said we wanted to wait and see on Will and replacing him, and I think we saw this week that it's Avery's time. And again, it makes me very sad. Like Ace said, it makes me very sad for Will, but that's just how it's going to be. So I think Avery can really galvanize this team, really get the fan base interested, even more so than they already were, but can turn heads outside of K-State as well. And I think that there's a lot of great positives that Avery Johnson could bring to the table.
Yeah. So hopefully we can avoid talking about that for the rest of the episode. We kind of got all the thoughts out there. So now we're going into the game day grade segment where we talk about every single position group, including coordinators, giving them a grade from F to A+. F meaning they nearly single-handedly lost us the game. A+ meaning they nearly single-handedly won us the game. And remember how I said we would be avoiding talking about the quarterback situation? Well, here we are, because the first grade is quarterbacks. Hello, Maple. How are you today? Please get away from the microphone. But you could separate the quarterback grades into the two different quarterbacks. I'm not going to do that. Connor, you saw my grades before this, and you saw that I had 3 question marks next to the quarterback. Will had a good game. I don't care what anyone says. Will had a good game. I tweeted a joke yesterday that I don't think many people realized was a joke, where whenever DJ had the false start, I said Avery would have simply willed DJ Giddens to not false start there. People took it seriously. which I feel like is its own can of worms. But Will didn't have a bad game. Avery just had a game for the ages. And because of that, I feel like the quarterbacks are worthy of an A+ by virtue of Avery Johnson scoring 5 touchdowns. That's all I really got.
Yeah, I gave the quarterback room an A+. Majority of that is Avery for having an all-time performance that should be remembered forever, and I think will be. Because this was the arrival, I think, is probably the best way to put it. And this is going to be... It's going to be one of those games that people talk about, like, 20 years from now. Like, where were you when Avery Johnson came off the bench and had 5 rushing touchdowns? And he threw the ball decently well. He had a few passes that he probably could have had back, but I'm splitting hairs there. Like, he had one to Phil that he didn't really lead him properly and ended up being, like, 4th and short instead of a first down.
Why did Will Howard make Phil drop that pass?
Well, he caught it. He just stumbled out. And then Will was also pretty solid. He had a nice throw to Ben as well. He layered it pretty well. And then Ben, of course, got himself open like he manages to do quite often. But, I mean, it was Avery Johnson's day when it's all said and done. And he played awesome. He had 5 touchdowns. He's, in a very literal sense, the reason we won. He scored every point other than a Chris Tennant field goal. Or he scored most of the points, I should say. Avery was pretty incredible. So A+ for the quarterbacks.
Yep. Running backs, I ended up giving a B+ because I felt like there were some holes that, especially DJ. DJ didn't have a bad game, by the way. He had 53 yards on 12 attempts, which is 4.4 per carry. Not a bad day at all. Trayshawn Ward had 118, never got tackled for a loss. There was just some times that I feel like the holes were being missed and there were yards left on the field. Plus the DJ false start. I know we won. And the fact that we won is going to stop me from... Well, it's not going to stop me, but it's going to stop me from thinking about as much some of the questionable moments. OPI in the back of the end zone. But... I gave them a B+ because I felt like despite their good performance, they still could have done more and left a few yards on the field.
Yeah, I gave them a very similar grade. I gave them an A-. The reason I gave him an A- was just because I really, really liked what Trayshawn Ward showed. And this was kind of flashes of how Kleiman handled the running backs in his first season in 2019, where in 2019, James Gilbert and Jordan Brown would both be getting series to start, and then whoever the hot hand was, if there was one, they would get the bulk of the carries going forward. And that's how that happened in this game. DJ and Trayshawn had similar amounts of carries, but Trayshawn was the closer here. He definitely got more carries down the stretch. Of course, Trayshawn never lost yards, but something I didn't notice until just looking at the stats right now was his longest carry was 18 yards, and he had 15 for 118. Which means he was just running very efficient and effective runs with regularity. So he didn't have like 118 yards and had like one carry for like 80, and like one of his carries was like 82 yards, and everything else was like short runs. Now, he was very consistently gashing the Texas Tech front six. They were on a 3-3-5.
Yeah, they were on a 3-3-5.
Yeah, so he was really good, and was looking like the Trayshawn Ward that we've been wanting all year. And this was definitely his best game as a Wildcat. Only thing holding them back from doing much better was they didn't have touchdowns, which is not really their fault. That's Avery Johnson's fault for being good.
Touchdown vulture Avery Johnson.
Yeah, he is. Which also Avery Johnson is now tied with Will Howard for the team lead in rushing touchdowns, which I think makes him tied for the Big 12 lead for rushing touchdowns too.
Yep.
But
sure does.
Yeah, Trayshawn, he was really great. And DJ was good too. I mean, he wasn't fantastic, but he was solid. And he only ever lost 2 yards. But tonight's game put Trayshawn over 300, Saturday's game put Trayshawn over 300 yards. He's at the 337. he's just been really quality. And I'm happy that he's back to what seems to be full health, or at least close to it. When he's playing like this, K-State's at its best. I think he pairs really well with Avery Johnson as well, specifically. So if Avery ends up being the guy going forward, I think we'll see a lot more Trayshawn.
Yeah. Receivers, I'm going to tell you something right now. If we lost this game, the receivers would be getting an F. The fact that we didn't lose is the only reason the receivers are not getting an F. And they are the number one concern with me on this entire team. Linebacker depth, probably number 2. But the receivers are just straight up not good right now. They're still not separating, and that is the number one reason. If the receivers were separating, I don't think the Will Howard discussion is even a discussion. But if the receivers aren't separating, Avery Johnson is just a Band-Aid for the issue. Because you can't... This isn't... I love Avery Johnson. He does not have the build to be 2012 Colin Klein. He does not have the build to take those hits. Not yet.
No. Yeah, he is not a battering ram.
No.
And I really hope we don't use him as one. I don't think we will. Hopefully Colin Klein has a desire to prevent anyone else from being used as a battering ram after he was grinded down to the bone.
Yeah. But the only bright spot for me at receiver, Phil got 4 catches. Somehow he's going to do that. J-Jax was fine. RJ only got 7 snaps, but he got a catch. I think RJ's hurt again, which is a shame. Keegan Johnson had 1 rush. He's probably still hurt. Jace Brown was the only receiver that I saw create more than 3 yards of separation on his route, which we predicted several months ago. I would go as far as to say we were probably the first people to actually predict this. Jace Brown is who he is, and that is going to be a consistently solid receiver. And at this point, Jace Brown, on that one route, showed more to me than a lot of the other receivers. D- for the receivers, but Jace Brown, you get a good noodle sticker.
Yeah, I give him a D- as well. Really disappointing for Keegan Johnson to have another game with no receptions. He had 1 rush, but who cares, I guess. Keegan is clearly a very athletic receiver, and I think he still has a future of potentially being good, but it's clear that he's just not quite ready yet, or he's still more hurt than he's been letting on. RJ had 1 catch and got absolutely clobbered after it, so he only got that 1 bit. Jaden had 1 reception, and he showed some fight at the end to get across the first down marker, but that was it. Yeah, like Ace said, Jace Brown was maybe the most encouraging of the receivers. He didn't play a ton of snaps, but he had a nice catch, a 21-yard gain from Avery. And Phil had 4 catches for 47 yards, but our starting 3 need to be getting more separation and doing more. And they have been doing. We have seen for both quarterbacks, Avery and Will, where they have plenty of time, they extend the play, and just nobody gets open. And I think that's what we're really getting at when we say we can't just have our offense be Avery running the ball. Probably,
yeah.
Maybe he ends up being fine, and we just become a QB power offense entirely, and it works. But I would prefer we have a passing element to our offense, and we are not particularly threatening as a passing attack whatsoever.
No.
Ben Sinnott had a nice game, but he's not a wide receiver, so D-.
Which, speaking of Ben Sinnott, I actually gave tight ends fullbacks an A for Ben Sinnott's performance, and also the fact that he killed multiple people on blocks after we spent about a month complaining about Ben Sinnott's blocking. Apparently he heard us because he killed 3 people last night. I gave them an A. I gave basically Ben Sinnott an A.
Yeah, I did the same thing. He had 6 catches for 72 yards. He was reliable as we expect him to be. 6 catches is his most on the year. He had a 42-yard reception as well, where he showed glimpses of his old bowling ball ways. He played really well, and on one of Avery's touchdown rushes, he destroyed 2 human beings who did nothing wrong other than get in his way. And Ben, he's taken a step as a run blocker, because early in the season he was really bad at run blocking. He had seemingly lost a step from what he had once been as a run blocker, but he's really recovered well in that sense. Additionally, it's worth noting that it seems like Garrett Oakley has usurped Will Swanson fully as being tight end 2, which I'm here for, and that's not a dig for Will Swanson. I think Garrett Oakley is the truth, and we've been thinking Garrett Oakley has been the truth. We have many bad takes, like Austin Romaine being like 3rd to last in our rankings, or Jack Fabris being 2nd to last.
Being fair, Austin Romaine didn't post his senior film.
That was actually Tomaszewski. We had
no, Romaine did it too. Romaine and Tomaszewski, neither of them posted their senior film.
Regardless,
we still missed.
Yeah, we still missed. We missed on Fabris. We missed on Jacob Parrish. I missed on BJ Payne. One guy that I think that we're probably gonna end up being right on is Garrett Oakley, where he was a 2-star, and we've been on the Garrett Oakley hype train for a few years now, and so he's now playing significant snaps. We're just waiting for him to have his breakout game, really, where he's playing a lot. Anytime we go 22 or 12, he's tight end 2 for the most part. Swanson's still getting some run, but Oakley's the guy going forward, I think.
Swanson's mostly the blocker.
Yeah, but Oakley, really, really happy to see him on the field a lot. He's just a monster athlete for his size. He looks a lot bigger as well, because he was pretty slight. He was basically a receiver when he was in high school.
Yeah.
He was barely 200 pounds, 210 maybe.
It's kind of like a Will Anciat, where he's really slight for his frame.
Mm-hmm. But he's really filled out, and he looks the part of a tight end now. He's got really long arms. Kind of going on a side rant here, I guess, but tight ends, impressive. Nice night for them.
Yeah. Next up is the offensive line, who I thought actually had a pretty solid day. Not living up to the hype of the preseason, but I think that ship has sailed. I gave them a B, because there were a few times, especially with Will in, where they just couldn't hold back whenever Tech was pinning their ears back for a pass rush. And that's going to happen to a lot of offensive lines, but they are sort of held to a different standard for me. As soon as Avery entered the game, they sort of got... I think what this line is built to do is they're meant to be a pin and pull line, where Gilly is almost certainly meant... Because that's kind of Gilly's skill set. If he's the pin blocker on a pin and pull, he just needs to get in their way. And if he's the pull, he can just dive at their ankles, a la Noah Johnson. But I think that's where this line is at their best, and we did a lot of that with Avery in the game. Like the quarterback wrap read we had, and then the lead option. The quarterback running game with AJ is a beautiful thing to watch schematically. I'm really excited to see KSU fans. By the way, shout out KSU_fan. Does great work. I'm really excited to see his scheme breakdown of it. But I felt like they had a solid enough game to where they get a B.
I give them a B+. They were, again, kind of similar to last year, and at points this year, they seem to get better as the game goes on, which I'm not sure why that is. Maybe they're just really well conditioned.
I think that's probably the case.
Yeah, but they've been... They were quality, I thought. This was one of their better games, not their best game, but one of their better games on the year. Carver, had a very rough start to the year. We all know that, but he's been, at the very least, not as noticeably bad, which is a big step. And at times, has even looked pretty good. Cooper Beebe's Cooper Beebe. Panzer, I think, has been quietly pretty decent this year. Poitier's been solid at times in his road to recovery. KT Leviston, still a quality left tackle. really kind of came out of nowhere last year and has continued to be pretty decent this year.
And then BB's BB.
Yeah, BB's BB. So there's a lot to like about him. At times they weren't great. Had some issues earlier and run blocking, although some of it may have been DJ trying to bounce it outside a little too much, which I guess we should have talked about when we were talking about running backs. But all in all, solid night for the offensive line. I thought that they played pretty well. So they get B+.
Yep. Now on to the defensive side of the ball with defensive linemen. They don't register much in the way of sacks. In fact, there are only 2 sacks on the day, one being credited to Duke and the other to Austin Romaine. That doesn't tell the full story. I think PFF tracked us as having 26 pressures. That is making the quarterback's life hell. Like that is truly like they are in hell for a minute. The defensive line, I felt, had a really good game, both in terms of how they were sort of controlling the run game outside of that one, fluky gain to Taj Brooks. I felt like we contained him really well. Defensive line was also getting consistent pressure, getting Baron Morton or Jake Strong off their spot. I gave the defensive line an A. I was really impressed with their performance.
I gave the defensive line an A-. I liked a lot of what they did. The only thing is that at times it seems like more and more as the season has gone on that our defensive line rushes have been getting stonewalled a bit more, especially on the edge. It seems like we've been struggling to really move anyone anywhere. So that's been a little frustrating, but some of that may just be fatigue. They struggled a little bit at times in run defense, but we knew that Taj Brooks was a fantastic running back, and we're just kind of lucky they didn't use him more. But, 22 pressure speaks for itself. Khalid Duke had a sack, which I don't know what his total is on the year. It's probably like 4.5 or 5.5, I think, at this point. But it's been a little bit more unusual for K-State defensive ends as of recent years, where he's been more a consistent growth and improvement on the year. He's got 5 sacks total this season. But yeah, defensive line's been solid. Could use a little work on tackling at times. Wasn't the best tackling night as a whole for the defense, but still, they were pretty good. A-.
Yep. Linebackers, speaking of having an up and down day, because you'd get splash plays from Austin Romaine, who we didn't know was playing through a broken wrist. You get splash plays from Austin Romaine, and Austin Moore didn't have his best day tackling, and I think he would tell you that. But all in all, Dez had a quietly solid game. That's how I would sort of describe the linebacking performance. Was outside of tackling, it was quietly solid. I ended up giving them a B+, because I felt like they could have done more in coverage and they could have done a lot more in terms of tackling. But all in all, they still ended up limiting a pretty explosive back, and also where Clenderin, it was such a jerk move to keep calling Spark against the true freshman quarterback when you're up 3 scores. That's like, you put him in Stalingrad for a moment. That was not necessary.
Yeah, I give the linebackers a B. Tackling was not great, so I nearly gave them a B-, but I went with a B still, just as a little bit of grace given just the lack of depth later in the game. And just, it's been, they've been the most injured position group by far this year. They've lost a lot. Romaine going down at the end of the game. Hopefully he is fine, because we definitely need him. But yeah, the tackling's just been, it was a little suspect against Texas Tech, so that's going to need to get worked out. But, losing Clifton for the second half, losing Romaine near the end of the game, that put us in a precarious spot. And so we're we're going to have to be really careful with our linebacker depth going forward. Unsung player that I think did pretty well was Bo Palmer. Kobe Savage in the post game said that the reason he got his first interception was Bo Palmer for playing good coverage and forcing a high throw. So shout out Bo Palmer via Kobe Savage, but
by way of
so it's fairly solid night for the linebackers, which is weird to say because Tech had 480 yards of offense on like 80 plays. So it was a lot of yardage, a lot of raw yardage, but you hold them to 21 points. Should have been probably 17 because of the uncalled offensive pass interference, but what are you going to do? I mean, we still won by 17, so can't complain too much.
Yeah. Yep. In terms of defensive backs, that is the last group there. Last position group that we do coordinators, obviously, but up and down is how I would describe it. Jacob Parrish got really unlucky. He developed Keenan Garber syndrome, where he's in the right position. He's just kind of getting screwed over by either soft PI calls, legitimate PI calls, or just slightly overrunning the play. Like, he's in position. Parrish didn't have a bad game. Keenan, God, watching him play gives me nightmares, but he's still in the right position, so I can't complain much. The only complaints are really those back shoulder PI balls. Safeties had probably their best game on the year. Kobe with 2 picks. Siegel ended up getting a PI ball, but was really damn good the rest of the game. VJ getting his first pick, a one-handed grab, by the way. So the safeties had a really good game. Corners had a really solid game. It's just the unlucky parts that I couldn't give them an A, so I gave them a B+.
Yep, I gave them a B+ as well. Really liked what the safeties did. Siegel had, I think he had a tackle for loss.
And he did on a screen.
He's been really, really good this year. Parrish, bit of a rough day. But some of it is just getting unlucky, like you said. Garber, I thought, was solid enough. We saw a little bit of Jordan Wright at corner as well. Apparently Daniel Cobbs played. I didn't notice him. But beyond that, of course, the starting line at safety, Kobe Savage, VJ Payne, and Siegel. They were really good. And Kobe, hopefully that was a return to form. He had some solid tackles in the backfield. Was running around the field kind of like he did last year, looking more comfortable than he had in a while. So hopefully that's a sign of things to come from Kobe Savage. But of course VJ had that great pick. Kobe had 2. Siegel, he had that PI ball. It was kind of soft, but it is what it is. So there you had a B+. Not too bad.
Yep. Klein, this is another one that was hard for me. I saw him run a bubble with Avery. I saw him run a speed out also with Avery. Connor, you weren't here to witness my reaction to that, but I have a feeling you either would have agreed with me. You know exactly what my reaction. You don't need to be there to know what my reaction was. But the play calling, it's so hard at this point because we don't have access to the All-22. Please. Someday. That was totally necessary, by the way. But I don't know how much of it is on play calling anymore. Because, you can scheme guys open, but, when that fails, they still have to put onus on themselves. That being said, it's almost an irrelevant question because, holy God, the QB running game he schemed up with Avery was so ridiculously good and creative. It balanced out to a B+, but there was a time in the first half of this game where I sort of preemptively did the grades, and Klein was sitting there with an F again. And he redeemed himself by virtue of Avery Johnson.
Yeah, I gave him a B. I thought there were a few play calls that were really weird at times in the game. I was also equally concerned for a bit. There were some things he was doing I was a little confused about, but all in all, it ended up working. He ended up kind of adjusting. He seemed a bit more comfortable calling plays with QB run. Maybe that's from his experience, so he knows what to do there. But he did pretty well. By the end of the game, he was able to identify that, hey, this Avery Johnson guy is running pretty well. Let's continue to do that until they stop us. And they decided not to stop us. That was a big reason that Kleiman said that Avery played pretty much the entire second half, which was that Tech was just not lining up to stop the QB run. So
that's the same thing that happened to them last year against Adrian.
Yeah, so they just decided to keep going and keep doing it. And so I guess at this rate, as long as McGuire's there, we should just run QB power all game against them. So Klein gets a B. He adjusted really well in this game, which was something that we had been complaining about, was that the adjustments had been lacking, but he adjusted pretty well in this game.
You know what my reaction was. But anyway, now it's Kleinerman. This one's simple. A lot of the big plays were bad luck. I don't feel like Kleinerman put any of his players in a bad position like he has done in the past few weeks. I gave him an A. Genuinely, and this is not a joke, if he didn't call Spark like basically every single play, which if you don't know what Spark is, we keep referencing it, and I don't think we've ever said what it is. It's K-State's all-out blitz. It's their cover zero. If he wouldn't have called Spark so many times, A, I don't think we give up one of those touchdowns, but B, it's it's kind of mean. It was kind of mean to do that. I gave him an A for it, but like that was still really mean.
I gave him a B+. I think run defense, all things considered, was fine. Taj Brooks did what he did, and we knew that was going to happen. And frankly, we held Taj Brooks to less than I thought that we were going to give up. So that's a success. I was frustrated at times with some of the pass defense, but again, some of it was just unluckiness. So there's not much to do there. Just would like to have guys be in positions to really finish off the pressures a little bit more. It seemed like there were a lot of times that we were really, really, really close. Like we were blowing up Baron Morton in the first half.
That poor guy.
Multiple times. I think we blew up Jake Strong a few times as well. So the blitzes were getting there, but they were just kind of slow developing at times and just weren't getting there quite fast enough. So I didn't give him an A, although some of that is more on performance than him. He's still, he calls the plays, but he also coaches them all week. Yeah. So I didn't quite give him an A for that reason, because I think he can do better. We've seen him do better. But he still was good. He was still good in this game.
Yep. So that is game day grades. Now we can talk about MVPs. Gee, I wonder who the offensive MVP is.
Yeah, I won't even make a joke about it. Like that's pretending it's someone else. It's Avery Johnson.
It's Avery Johnson. Yeah, it's.
I mean, when you score all of the touchdowns for an offense in a game, and you came off the bench and you're a true freshman quarterback, you get to be MVP. Yeah. I don't make the rules. So
I don't make the rules, but I enforce them.
Yes.
Defense, I feel like there are a couple arguments. I feel like the obvious one is Kobe Savage for the 2 picks. You can pick Kobe. I think Siegel honestly had a top-to-down better game because he only got beat once, and that was the PI ball. But outside of that, he had a really solid game. This is the Siegel that I thought we were getting, that we thought I would have gotten at the very beginning of the season.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been getting recently. I think the MU game woke him up.
Yeah, we've been talking about him the last few weeks as having really stepped up, and that's continuing even now. And I think we expressed a little doubt to Kleiman earlier this week, saying that he thought Siegel was playing like one of the best in the conference, but I think that's actually true now. I think that he's played like that at that level 3 consecutive weeks now, and been really, really happy with Siegel. I won't pick him though. I want in my heart to choose VJ Payne for his first career pick, but I can't quite do it just because of Kobe Savage having 2 picks, 3 if you want to look at it that way, I guess. But I mean, yeah, Kobe was awesome in this game. He looked like his old self. This was his best game on the year. It's not even close, I don't think. 2 picks. So, great game for Kobe. Have to go with him. VJ, I guess, gets an honorable mention there.
Yeah.
But,
all 3 safeties are mentioned in some way in the MVPs.
Indeed. And we also need to give shout-outs to Seth Porter on special teams.
Yeah.
He was awesome. He had multiple great kick coverage tackles. He stopped a ball at the 1-yard line on a punt from Bloomer. Speaking of Bloomer, he was awesome as well. He had 5 punts, and all of them were inside the 20. So, special teams took a big step this week. Tennant made his field goal and all of his extra points as well. I think we sent most of our... We had quite a few touchbacks for kickoffs, but when we didn't, they were taking it out deep. And
Seth Porter was there.
Yeah, and Seth Porter was there. So, special teams was... They were massive this week. They did a really good job. And they deserve some credit. Even though we don't do special teams MVP. They, as a whole, deserve a big shout-out.
Yeah, we can make an exception this week for Seth Porter.
Mm-hmm.
The inaugural special teams MVP, Seth Porter. So now we get into the general takeaways. And mentioned at the top, everything is still in front of us. If you want to be very technical, we control our own destiny until we lose again. If we lose again. And I feel like the fact that everything is still in front of us, but there's such a low margin of error, I think that that's where Kleiman sort of thrives as a coach. Which is so strange given his background as the hunted in FCS, where he was, in North Dakota State very rarely had their backs to the wall. But at FBS, at least at K-State, that's when they've seemingly played their best football, with the exception of 21 Texas. I don't want to talk about it. But, yeah, everything's still in front of us.
Yeah, which is so weird to think about. But, I mean, it's the same thing as last year, where you drop a game in non-conference that you were really expecting to win. You drop a conference game on the road to a team, well, this year, that has ended up actually looking better than I think we were giving them credit for. Oklahoma State's out there pulling a 2021 right now.
God, I hope not.
But I hope... but this Texas Tech game was, in effect, a pseudo-elimination game, I think, for Arlington. It was 2 teams that were in desperate need of a win. And K-State, they wanted it more, that particular night at least. They really left everything on the field. They played really well. They played with emotion. And they were really good. And so that leaves the door for Arlington open. We made it last year with 2 losses in conference. So we could, in theory, suffer another loss. I don't think it'll work like that this year. But we are still very much in the Arlington race right now.
Yeah. Next up, shout out this defense has settled in. After a few performances where they were just kind of okay. Second half defense has gone crazy every single game, though. The defense seems to be settling into who they are in terms of identity. Corners have especially settled in, despite the fact that Keenan Garber still scares me. Every single time he's out there, he still terrifies me. Will Lee hopefully will come back soon, and I won't be scared anymore. Safeties especially have settled in. Austin Romaine has proven that he's mature beyond his years at that linebacker position. Dez stepping in, and although the defensive line has been somewhat quiet outside of Khalid Duke, and minor shout out to Brendan Mott, I feel like the defense is sort of settling into what they are and what their identity is going to be. And that is a team that, if you're going to beat, you need to beat through explosive plays. And the better and better they get at limiting those explosive plays, that is the only weakness to this defense as it stands right now, is explosiveness. especially if like the showing we get against Tech is to show.
Yeah. Defense was really good. There's, of course, early in the year, they really struggled. They did not look up to expectation, but they've been playing pretty well the last couple of weeks. Because last week against Oklahoma State, even though everybody was angry, I still think the defense was really good. They played better against UCF a few weeks ago at this point, but they've been doing well, and they played well against a good Texas Tech offense, so they deserve a ton of credit. I can't say much that you didn't say, but yeah, the defense they've really stepped up.
Yeah. Last but not least, receivers are still a cause of concern, but Jace Brown showed flash. He showed a flash.
Yes. The receivers have really regressed since non-conference play. Keegan Johnson, we badly need him to have a breakout game. Even just like a semi-breakout game. Like if he can just eclipse like 40 receiving yards, like which is a very low standard.
It's a low bar.
But we really need someone in the receiver room to step up right now. And if it's not going to be one of the starters, then why not have it be Jace Brown or a guy like Trace Spivey? I think that we very badly need one of those guys to step up and really push the older guys. Because those younger guys are still hungry because they need to make a name for themselves. But it seems right now that the starters... they're just not finding ways to get separation. They haven't been super impressive for the most part the last few weeks. And we've seen at times all of them have good games this year. Phil's had a couple good games. Jaden was on fire to start the year. RJ was really great the first game. We just need one of them to really step up again.
Yeah. So next up, the next game is TCU in Manhattan, a nighttime kickoff against the old rivals from last year. Also, I know I will mention this on the episode where we cover TCU. There is nearly no part of TCU that we are not familiar with, except like the quarterback and their guard. We have seen every single skill player before, but most of them not for TCU. But we'll talk about that on the actual episode. Do you have any final thoughts about the Texas Tech game?
It's really nice to have a win to talk about.
I'm really sad that the Twitter schism has already begun, and that'll be my final thoughts.
Very well.
But thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alley Cats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville ACats. If you want to email us, we're AggieVilleAlleyCats@gmail.com. And if you want to support us or follow us on a more personal note, I'm at ACEdward00.
I am at Connor Baltazar, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alley Cats merch store. Link in the podcast description and our Twitter bio. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alley Cats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alley Cats.